Hello, I'm Ed,
And I'm Ben.
and this is What About Porridge?
What about porridge?
Yes, indeed. Welcome to What About Porridge, the podcast where we dig into the world of health and nutrition, one fascinating topic at a time. I am your average person, just trying to make sense of all the advice.
Maybe slightly above average, Ed.
Very slightly. That's very kind of you. But sitting alongside me is Ben. He is a qualified nutritional therapist, and he's going to be playing the role of guy with all the answers and possibly a few surprises about what's going on with our food and our bodies. So each week, the plan is that we'll be chatting about kind of everything from the basics through to real nitty-gritty science. We're going to be making use of real case studies from Ben's clinic to get a closer look at how this stuff works in real life. And our goal is to try to make the complex stuff clear, useful, and maybe even a bit thought-provoking. So whether you're here to learn, explore, or just figure out what is the deal with porridge, we're glad to have you along for the ride. Let's get started.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah. Now I'm going to do my best to lay out what I believe is the most robust evidence, but it should be remembered that this is just my opinion, so nothing should be considered medical advice.
Yeah, definitely nothing I say is medical advice. So should we start by addressing the name of the podcast?
Well, I actually think that we should build up a bit of suspense and maybe answer it in episode 2 or 3. I think both of our listeners can wait that long.
Okay, perfect. Yes, both our listeners love a bit of suspense. All right, we'll let that build up. Yeah, so our focus is on nutrition and why it's important, but we're also planning to cover other kind of lifestyle factors.
Yeah, that's right. So studies show that diet and lifestyle drive 85% of the risk of chronic disease and about 90% of our lifespan. And basically, if you want to be healthy and live a long time, there are lots of factors that you have to pay attention to. And I've made a list of 12 of these. And I'm sure at some point in future episodes, we're going to cover all 12. But what you eat is going to be pretty near the top of the list. So that's the topic for today.
Yeah, perfect. So some foreshadowing. So the plan is what? So in today's episode, we're going to talk about why we eat and then move on to a case study. And at the moment, I know nothing about this case study, so it's going to be all a surprise.
Yeah. So, I mean, the topic of why we eat sounds so obvious, but in my experience, very few people can adequately answer this question. And when you do answer this question, it establishes the basis for what a healthy diet actually is, and which dietary patterns are healthy, and which ones put you at risk. So it's quite a foundational topic.
All right. So can I, before you answer or start telling us why we eat, let me have a guess at what the answer is. I think that if we don't eat, then you'll die. And that's why.
I think this is quite a good answer. Yeah, so the textbook answer would be because prolonged underconsumption, malabsorption, or excessive loss of essential nutrients impairs essential metabolic processes, leading to disorders, I should say, and in some cases, death. Although I do definitely know that there are people that eat purely for pleasure, and there are lots of other reasons for eating as well.
Okay, so I'm going to take that as a win. I think broadly I was right, but it sounds like there might be some other things to consider as well.
Yeah, and you can go a long time without food. I mean, there's a famous case of the Scotsman Angus Barbery who went for more than a year without eating, but then he started at about 207 kilograms, which is over 32 stone. And it's quite an interesting story because he was put on a metabolic ward to help get his weight down. But he achieved such good results that he insisted in staying in the ward. And I think it was initially going to be a month, but yeah, he stayed for over a year. And he ended up at 82 kilograms, which is under 13 stone. And he managed to maintain that for the rest of his life and lived a sort of long and happy life. So it was an interesting story. Yeah. As an interesting
so he was on this metabolic ward. He literally ate nothing.
Well, he was allowed some juices. So they did feed him vitamins. He was allowed tea and coffee. And I think he had a yeast extract during the period as well. So
Nice.
so yeah, but basically he didn't eat for a year. He has the world record for that.
That's pretty impressive.
So,
okay,
yeah.
so I'm taking from this that, okay, so it's not just about dying, it's also about not having malnutrition.
That's right, yeah. So the term malnutrition encompasses a broad range of deficiencies. And what we're really talking about is everything from overt clinical malnutrition to subclinical nutrient deficiencies. And when we're talking about overt clinical nutrition, I'm really talking about a form of malnutrition which is characterized by visible signs and symptoms which result from nutrient deficiencies. So you'll see things like noticeable weight loss, muscle wasting, edema, which is swelling, and other physical manifestations. So these are the sort of severe nutritional deficiencies that are typically diagnosed by a doctor during a physical examination. But what I see a lot of is subclinical nutrient deficiencies, which are things that might not actually have any obvious signs or symptoms and are typically only identified when you do blood testing or really, really accurate diet tracking.
Right, interesting. I'm pretty sure I saw a news article like a week or so ago that was saying that the number of people getting admitted into hospital in England has like massively increased because of vitamin deficiencies or people needing to be kind of put on courses of vitamins.
Yeah, there's been a big resurgence actually. So the NHS data covered the 2023-2024 period, and it showed that there were more than 190,000 hospital admissions due to a lack of iron. And during the same period, they issued 800 courses of treatment for iron deficiency and nearly 40,000 treatment courses for B12 deficiency. So, yeah, quite stunning numbers. And interestingly, another condition we're seeing more of recently is rickets. And it's showing up in children, obviously due to vitamin D deficiency. But stunningly, in 2022, there were over 400 hospital admissions in England from rickets, which is characterized by sort of softening and weakening of bones.
Yeah, I mean, rickets is something that I don't know. I don't know anything about it, but I sort of almost associate it with like a sort of Victorian childhood or something. I thought it was a disease that we've pretty much eliminated.
Yeah, and to be honest, until recently, that was my assumption, that these were very, very rare cases. But more than 400 hospital admissions seems to be a large number to me.
This is in England.
In England, yeah.
For our international audience there.
I mean, vitamin D is something that's really, really important, and I talk about with all my clients, and it's something we should definitely come back to a bit later.
Sounds good. Okay, so if we're thinking about why we eat, then it sounds like the goal should be to not die, but also to try to prevent, I can't remember the names of it, so the kind of clinical nutritional deficiency, but also these kind of subclinical ones that you see a lot of.
That's right, yeah. So the textbook answer would be that we eat to provide our cells, tissues, and organs with the raw materials they need to make enzymes and hormones for growth and development, as well as the energy we need for the full range of physical and mental activities that make up human life. And one key thing to understand is that the body can actually make some of these things that we need. So during our evolution, some substances were deemed to be so vital to our survival that we evolved the ability to make them. And a good example of that would be cholesterol, without which you wouldn't be able to make cell membranes or hormones, and you'd actually die pretty quickly. And there are some other interesting examples. So we were obviously surrounded by plants during our evolution to the extent that vitamin C was deemed not necessary to make because it was abundant in our environment and we could get it from food. So the body doesn't make vitamin C. It doesn't bother doing that. So we have to get vitamin C from our diet, otherwise we get things like scurvy.
Okay, so I've heard about this. So this is the thing where people talk about either essential or non-essential nutrients.
Yeah, exactly. So the term essential in nutrition has a very specific meaning, and it means that the body cannot make it. So that substance has to come from food, or in some cases from sunshine.
Sunshine is what, vitamin D?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so can you dive into this a little bit? Tell us about what some of these nutrients are.
Yeah, okay, so let's unpack this a bit. So most people are going to have heard of the macronutrients, protein, carbohydrate, and fat. And then there are also micronutrients. So the macronutrients that we need in large quantities, and then there are the micronutrients which we need in much smaller quantities. So everyone's heard of protein, fat, and carbohydrate, but interestingly, only 2 of them are essential. We need to get protein from food in the form of the 9 essential amino acids, and we need to get fat in the form of essential fatty acids. But carbohydrate is not an essential nutrient.
Okay, so you could survive. You don't have to eat carbohydrate.
Yeah, I mean it's not widely known, but in the nutrition community, it's not controversial because it's basic physiology that the body can make glucose. It does so through a process called gluconeogenesis, which maybe we'll talk about at some point. But yeah, the body can make the carbohydrate it needs.
Presumably, in general, even if you can make it, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good thing for you to rely on your body making it.
Oh, well, we evolved the mechanisms to make sure that we always had the glucose we needed for the brain and the other organs. So you could argue it both ways. You could argue that actually it's quite good to trigger these evolutionary processes on a regular basis. And you could also argue that it's probably good to give them a rest from time to time. But I mean, the point is the body has that flexibility to make certain things. So
I sense a subject for a future episode.
Yeah, I reckon probably so. Yeah.
All right, cool.
So then we are into the micronutrients, and we have 13 essential vitamins, some of which are water soluble and some of which are fat soluble, and then we have 15 essential minerals. So if we just cover the vitamins quickly, then the water soluble ones, you have 8 B vitamins and vitamin C, and then the fat soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. And then with the essential minerals, there are around 15 of these. It's not entirely agreed whether there are 15 or more like 20 essential minerals, but we're pretty much agreed on 15. And they fall into 2 categories of their own. There are macro minerals, and then there are micro minerals or trace minerals that we only need in teeny quantities. So the macro minerals are calcium, chloride, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, sodium, and sulfur. And then the trace minerals are chromium, copper, iodine, iron, manganese, molybdenum, selenium, and zinc. So a healthy diet is one that provides us with adequate quantities of all of these essential nutrients.
Right. Okay. So to just recap a little bit. So again, you're talking about these are essential nutrients, which means that they're things that the body can't create on its own. So we need to be getting them through our diet. And so what happens if you don't get them?
Well, that's a very good question. So the body essentially does this triage process, which leads to accelerated aging. So if you only just get enough of a nutrient, let's use zinc as an example because this has been well studied. If you only get just enough zinc, your body will redirect that nutrient towards short-term survival, energy production, immune function, and reproduction. But it does that at the expense of long-term maintenance, things like DNA repair and cellular regeneration. And the result of that is that you get an accumulation of cellular damage, and that contributes to the aging process and basically the development of age-related diseases.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of feel like my DNA is something that I'd quite like to have repaired.
Yeah, absolutely want it to be repaired.
That feels important.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, it's quite a lot, right? So you've got these, I've forgotten how even now already how many, like 14, 15 minerals. Most people, I would imagine, are not really probably even aware of them, let alone tracking whether they're getting enough of each one. But if you're not getting it, then that's going to be the stuff that is leading to premature aging and ultimately a shorter lifespan or shorter health span.
Yeah, it definitely contributes to that. So these are these subclinical nutrient deficiencies that I talked about, and the kind of consequences of not meeting those needs. I mean, there's a huge list, but the things that people might experience themselves are things like depressed immune function. So you might get sick quite a lot. You might experience fatigue, low energy. Impaired wound healing would be another one. So if you have an injury and it stays niggly for a long time, that can be a bad sign of sort of impaired nutrient status. Hormonal imbalances, digestive issues, muscle cramps and spasms, people have quite a lot. Delayed growth and development in children is another one, and that's often referred to in the medical literature as failure to thrive. And you might also experience problems with heart function and blood pressure issues. So yeah, quite broad ranging. And something I see quite a lot of is people who feel cold all the time. And that makes me think of things like inadequate protein intake, and blood sugar dysregulation, thyroid function being suppressed, low fat intake, maybe even things like low muscle mass. And right up there near the top of the list would be low iron, especially since we know that it's the most common nutrient deficiency worldwide. Something around 1.5 billion people worldwide have iron deficiency. And studies from the UK show that 1/4 of women don't get enough iron to meet the very, very lowest bar in nutrition, which is the lower reference nutrient intake, which only ensures 2.5% of the population get enough. So we have 1/4 of women not even reaching that super, super low bar.
Blimey. And are there any other deficiencies that are really common?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot. So without getting into just listing off tons and tons of statistics, we'll start in the UK. So we see that men and women in the UK are deficient in selenium. As many as 50% of women are deficient in selenium. Magnesium's quite common to see deficiencies. So 15% of men would be deficient in magnesium. And potassium, again, is a very common deficiency. In fact, in the States, 100% of people, according to a long-running nutrition survey that started in the 60s called the NHANES survey, showed that 100% of Americans don't get enough potassium. 94% don't get enough vitamin D. 92% don't get enough choline, and 89% don't get enough vitamin E. So yeah, it's quite a big problem.
And so what, like, why is this happening? I mean, obviously you kind of read a little bit about, in the papers they talk about soil depletion, and are there, is the soil at too low a quality in order to get nutrition into our foods? Is that the main thing?
I mean, that's definitely a contributory factor. The nutrient content of plant foods has declined quite dramatically over the last sort of 40 to 60 years. And, that's probably a result of monocrop agriculture, but also the hybridization of plant species to increase yield. So there's a lot going on with that. I would say probably at the top of the list would be the fact that our modern Western diet is made up of somewhere between 45 and 65% of carbohydrate in terms of total daily calories. So we're talking about things like refined grains, added sugars, sugar-sweetened beverages, and these are just poor sources of nutrients.
Right. So kind of linking this back to the point at the beginning about the essential macronutrients, carbohydrate was the one that you were saying is not essential,
right.
and yet it's making up a kind of big percentage of our diet. So is there a message here for just maybe in general we should all be looking at reducing the amount of carbohydrate that we're eating?
I think that would be a good general message, but maybe we could talk about it more in terms of increasing the foods that do contain these good nutrients, right, which we'll definitely come on to in a moment. I mean, it's probably worth just sort of emphasizing this a little bit. So if you take whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, and whole grain wheat flour, and even throw oats in there as well as a category, they contain no
We
vitamin.
love oats on the podcast.
We'll come back
about that later.
We'll come back to oats. So this group, so bread, pasta, whole grains, and oats, they contain no vitamin A, either retinol or carotene, no vitamin B12, no vitamin C, no vitamin D, and they're not a complete source of protein because they lack certain essential amino acids. And this is why so many of these sort of breakfast cereals and grain-based products have to be fortified. So they have to have nutrients added in, before they're shipped. So yeah, it's quite a big problem.
And this is maybe this term gets thrown around quite a lot, but people talk about empty calories. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that probably transitions into what you said a moment ago. So, we want to advise people to move in the direction of foods that do contain high concentrations of these essential vitamins and minerals. So this is where we talk about nutrient density, which is a really important subject at the heart of nutrition. And really, to understand and get a good understanding of nutrition, you have to address the topics of nutrient density and bioavailability. And I don't think we can do them justice in a single episode, but it is a good starting point to understand what are the most nutrient dense foods. And by far and away, the most nutrient dense food groups is organ meats, which very few people eat these days.
So what you mean liver and things like that?
Yeah,
kidneys,
liver and kidneys and heart, and all of the things that our grandparents probably used to make us eat. So they would be on a chart of nutrient density. They would be by far and away, the biggest contributors of these essential vitamins and minerals that we've talked about. Then you'd have herbs and spices, nuts and seeds, cacao, which is a surprising finding for a lot of people, which is the fourth most nutrient dense food. So there you're really talking about dark chocolate because that has the biggest concentration of the cacao bean.
Okay, but so just sorry to interrupt, but so when you're talking about nutrient density as a single value, cacao strikes me as I guess I can imagine it might have a lot of one particular vitamin, but does it have the diversity? Is
Well,
that taken into account as well, or what's
it's a
really
good
meant by density?
it's a good question. You're trying to tick as many of the 40 or so micronutrients that you need for normal function as possible. So cacao's a really good source of copper and iron.
Okay.
And it's also one of the best sources of antioxidants that we know about. So yeah, it's really, really good. It's up there. It's probably worth saying that it is the plant source of iron. It's non-heme iron. So, and we'll probably talk more about that. And then up there with cacao, you've got things like fish and seafood and beef and lamb and wild game. And then as you come down the list, you get to things like eggs and dairy and poultry, and eventually you get to legumes and vegetables and fruits. And then you go a bit further down the list and you're at things like grains and pseudo cereals. So, and they have much, much less nutrient content than your organ meats and your fish and seafood at the other end.
So yeah, as you say, I mean, organ meats is just not really part of our diet anymore.
Right, exactly. And if you were going to use the term superfoods, which gets used a lot, if you Google superfoods, you'll find a lot of things like kale and blueberries, and they're great foods. But really, if there is a superfood out there, it would be organ meat like liver. That's really where it's at. So yeah,
I think that's yet another topic for a future podcast. I think has got to be some recipes for organ meats,
making it palatable.
yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting topic, because there are some good cheats with that to achieve exactly as you say.
Nice.
Now, if we also briefly touch on the topic of bioavailability, and we apply this understanding that if you cook vegetables, it increases the bioavailability. That's a factor that's a good strategy for making the nutrients in vegetables more attainable to the body. So it helps you take them up into the cells. Now, there are other things that impact the availability of nutrients in foods, one of which is actually the phytic acid content in grains reduces the ability or the bioavailability of those nutrients. So this can be a problem with people that have a diet that's heavily based around grains. And
so grains meaning sort of wheat and things like that?
Yep, exactly. So the bread and pasta example that I gave earlier on. So we find that phytic acid, these are what's known as sort of anti-nutrients, to use the slang term, but the phytic acid can bind to minerals like iron, calcium, and zinc, and that reduces their bioavailability, and it essentially hinders their absorption in the digestive system. So you can't just look at nutrient density by itself. You have to factor in the bioavailability of the nutrients in the foods.
I think actually I've vaguely heard about this. Is this the thing where people talk about how important it is to soak your beans and things like that? So if you're cooking like kidney beans or chickpeas from scratch, if you soak them, it's supposed to reduce the amount of phytic acid.
Yeah, that's right. So cultures around the world have developed strategies for combating these anti-nutrients as much as possible, and soaking and sprouting are some of the things that you can do to pull out some of those substances like phytic acid, exactly as you say. Yeah.
Jolly good.
So the problem there is that most of us are basing our diet on foods that really don't provide many of the nutrients that we need. But when you have this knowledge, it means you can start shifting towards more nutrient dense foods, and that really is the kind of key message here. Is you need to understand where to get the highest concentration of these nutrients, and then that sort of guides your diet choices.
Yeah, and if that feels overwhelming or complicated, then the good news is there's a new podcast that is just out that is gonna help you make sense of this.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I mean, you better send me a link to it, Ed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So there's also more good news, which is, yes, this is very, very complex, but you can condense a lot of nutrition education and understanding about what we should eat into 4 words: nutrient dense whole foods. Now, most people already know what whole foods are, and we've just talked about nutrient density. So when you have that understanding and you have that as your basis for what a good diet is, nutrient dense whole foods, it takes you a long way just having that 4 words as your understanding.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think, the plan now is, right, we're going to transition in a second into the case study, but hopefully that should give us an opportunity to sort of explore some of the principles that you've talked about and kind of bring it to life, what it means in terms of a real individual.
Yeah, exactly. So we can talk about Diana, which is not her real name, but we've protected her identity for obvious reasons. But I first spoke to her in 2021, and she had been to see a lot of doctors and specialists and been really kind of passed around pillar to post. And she was suffering from chronic acne rosacea, and she was 46 when she first came to see me. So she'd had a long history of poor skin, which was, really.
And so, sorry, so acne is obviously spots, but
yeah.
What's rosacea?
Rosacea is a sort of like angry red rash that people have on the face. It can be on other parts of the body as well, but typically that's what you see, this kind of redness in the cheeks and the face.
Right.
And the standard of care would be typically that people, like Diana, was given lots of topical treatments. So that might include steroid creams, but it would also include things like potentially antibiotics, and people are given quite harsh treatments like Accutane and things like this to try and combat acne and rosacea, especially in adults, because it's it's a sort of chronic condition, very difficult to get to the bottom of. And she also had brain fog and low energy. So they were her main symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And she decided to work with me, and so I ended up working with her for 12 months, and that's actually the way that I work. So I work with a very small number of clients, but we go kind of deep into their case. And so she also told me about lots of other kind of minor symptoms that she had. So she had constipation, she was bruising very easily, she had joint pain, runny nose, indigestion after eating fatty foods, and weak and brittle nails. She was also one of the people that was feeling cold all the time, which I talked about before.
And so presumably when she's sort of laying all this out, some of these things could be related to the same underlying problem, and others might just be completely unrelated, or there's multiple things going on.
Well, that's a very good question. I don't really try to focus on any one thing, because what you want to do is look at the interconnected nature of all of the things and look for patterns. And she actually came with a very complex health history. So in addition to the intake questionnaire, she had 4 extra pages of notes. And it spelled out that she had a family history of cancer, heart problems, and arthritis. She had a lot going on. So what you do in this situation is you get your client to say, okay, look, what are your top 3 things? And what are you really looking to achieve with those things? So she was very clear that what she wanted to do was get her skin looking good, because it's affecting her confidence and everything else. So I had an initial hypothesis pretty early on, having just been through her intake questionnaire, which covers, as I said, about family history and what she eats and lots of diet and lifestyle factors. And my hypothesis was that she was detoxifying through her skin. But the way
what does that mean?
I mean, well, the skin is literally used as an organ of detoxification. So if for some reason the body isn't able to detoxify through other channels, the skin's kind of there as a backup. So
other channels would be like what, the liver? At the limit of my biology.
The liver is tasked with a lot of detoxification. Yes. So
nailed it.
Yeah, and this was my early hypothesis. But the way that this works is you have to kind of go through the layers of the onion, and you have to start with the most obvious root causes and problems that are those outer layers. And that led me to what she was eating, and this brings us back to the topic for today. So when she first
I mean, at the risk of sort of making this over making the point too laborious, but linking back to our conversation just now about why we eat, you're saying she might have one of these subclinical nutrient deficiencies that we've been talking about, that so many people have, and that could be the cause of the symptoms she's experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see patterns of this time and again, and yes, you can immediately start to connect dots.
Right.
And I think I'll probably talk a bit more about that once I've revealed the the state of her food diary. So when she first came to see me, she ate a fairly standard Western diet, but she did cook from scratch quite a lot. But even so, the analysis of her food diary was shocking, and it was especially shocking to her. So,
because what she would have identified as somebody who eats a healthy diet.
Yes, exactly right. So if we just start with the big picture, then we'll start looking at the macronutrients. She wasn't meeting her protein needs. She wasn't actually getting any of her 9 amino acids in the quantities that were required.
And just before we go any deeper, how did you get to this? So you mentioned a food diary. How does that work?
Good question. So I get most of my clients to track what they eat over a 2-week period, as accurate as they possibly can, using a service called Chronometer, which is available both on the web and as an app. And if you accurately track, it gives you a really good breakdown, not just of macronutrients, but the essential vitamins and minerals we talked about as well. And it just literally says, you've met X percentage of this mineral during this time period. And if that 2 weeks is representative of your diet more broadly, that's a pretty good starting point without spending money on blood tests. And not everyone wants to spend money on blood tests to assess their nutritional status. So this is typically a good starting point.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we're going to now, you've actually got Diana's food diary or the Chronometer report, so we can kind of look at it together and dig into it.
That's right. Yeah. So let's start having a bit of a look at it then. So as I said, she wasn't meeting her protein needs, and you can see the list of amino acids here. These are the 9 essential amino acids. There's not one of them that she was meeting her needs during that 2 weeks. So
But the overall protein is 90%. Does that feels not like terrible,
it's not,
or is that still pretty bad?
well, it's not terrible, but if this is representative of somebody over the long term, you have to start asking yourself what happens if somebody doesn't meet those needs.
Yeah, I guess even if it's slightly below, if it's consistently below,
exactly
I
right.
can imagine that adding up to a problem.
Exactly right. And so we can definitely talk more about that in terms of, how many meals during a period of time you can go wild and and go off piste before it starts to affect you.
Mhm.
So you can see that here that her omega-3 fats were less than a third of the target. So that's a bit of an alarm bell there when you're thinking about skin, because skin is a fatty protective layer, and
Mhm.
it relies obviously on fats. What was also quite interesting was, although she wasn't meeting these protein needs and fat needs, she was exceeding her recommended carbohydrate intake by 50%. So, she was basing her meal largely on carbohydrates.
So it's sort of a pretty classic case then, or a good example of the problem that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, exactly right. So I thought it would be an interesting one for us to start with. And so then if we look at her micronutrients, she didn't meet any of her B vitamins, not even by a long shot. And the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K were also missed by a wide margin. Sorry, not A. She managed to meet A. It was the others, D, E, and K, that she missed by a wide margin.
Mhm.
And then if we look at her minerals, she only met 2 of those, which were manganese and sodium, and the rest, she didn't meet any of her mineral needs either. So this is the most outer layer of the onion, and
Mhm.
this was our obvious starting point with her, because we wanted to address her nutrient status. So if you consistently deprive your body of essential amino acids, it can lead to a wide range of physiological problems, because your amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, and so they play a pretty critical role in just about everything in the body. So when I have this information from my clients, I'm starting to think about everything from dry skin and brittle nails, which she has, to enzyme deficiencies and fatigue. So, I mean,
And I mean, are you able to? I mean, there's a lot there to kind of deal with. Are you able to kind of look at it and go, well, her top priority was the rosacea, so it's going to be this vitamin that's the problem, or is it more of a kind of we need to basically try to fix everything?
I think when I first started on my journey into nutrition, but certainly before I started training formally, I did fall into that trap, and that trap is called nutritionism, when you try to line up a particular symptom with a particular nutrient, and then you optimize for just that one nutrient. And there are obvious things that she needs to do. She needs to meet her protein needs, and she needs to meet her fat needs. But when you eat foods that contain those proteins and those fats, if you're constructing your diet sensibly around the principle of nutrient-dense whole foods, then you're going to get your vitamins and minerals along for the ride.
Right. Yeah, great.
And so let's just stick with the macronutrients for a little bit longer, because she wasn't meeting her protein needs, and we think that if this is a pattern that was consistent for her, you have to think about things that amino acids like tryptophan and tyrosine are precursors for neurotransmitters. So, for example, serotonin and dopamine. So, you might see depression, anxiety, brain fog, poor concentration, and memory. You also have to think about things like impaired cellular repair, impaired hormone production, which was likely contributing to poor skin barrier integrity and potentially exacerbating her acne rosacea. So there was a lot to think about, and that was just on the protein side of things. So yeah, and you have to think about the body as being this kind of highly complex adaptive system. So yeah, I think you kind of get the idea that consistently missing your targets for these essential nutrients is a concern.
Yeah, for sure. So this is interesting. So at the moment, you've got a list of reported symptoms. You've able to kind of deep dive into the food diary that's revealed then, a set of macro and micronutrients that are probably a problem. And then you've got I guess a very educated guess as to a kind of link between those two things. What's then the next step?
Yeah, so the first step with her was to really increase the nutrient density of her diet, and do further testing, because we really wanted to know what was going on in her liver with detoxification. Wanted to know what was going on in her gut. So we did do some blood tests and some stool tests, and that helped us go through the other layers of the onion. And this case has a really happy ending, because we did eventually discover that she had poor liver detox capability. Particularly phase 2 liver detoxification was a real problem for her. But we were able to address it, and the knock-on consequences for her skin were really dramatic. And
that's brilliant.
There's a lot we could unpack in this case study, so maybe we can return to it in the future and talk more about what those other tests were that we did. And
yeah, definitely. But did she change her diet as a result of your recommendations and this? In what way?
Well, I mean, you could just take a typical meal like breakfast, and she was one of the people that I see a lot was either having toast or porridge for breakfast, and then rushing off to work, because those things are sort of quite quick to do. And so breakfast is normally the meal that people get wrong most, I would say. So we usually start there. So she transitioned to much more nutrient dense food, incorporating eggs and avocado and things like that. So she was then getting the fats, but also the protein as well. So you can, if you eat eggs, you're getting 13 essential minerals from the egg yolk just along for the ride, as well as the protein and the beneficial fats. So it actually doesn't take much when somebody is moving from cereal grains to whole foods.
And then sort of how quickly did she start to see results?
Well, it took sort of 6 months before she started to consistently see results, because this was a very, very complex case. But by 9 months, she was self-reporting her symptom scores as having gone from a 3 to an 8.
Out of 10.
Which, and the thing about working with people with skin conditions is everyone can see the results. And so she was delighted. She was very, very happy. So, and I just want to quickly return to one subject, which is vitamin D, because as well as correcting her diet, I wanted to make absolutely sure that her vitamin D status was good. And this is something that I do with all my clients. So typically I'll have them do a blood test twice a year, once in summer and once in winter. And often help them to get set up with an at-home subscription service where you can do a blood test at home via a finger prick, and then that helps people adjust their levels and stay in the right place. But vitamin D is so critical for health. And to understand this, it's worth knowing that every cell in the body has a receptor for vitamin D, and it can influence the expression of more than 200 genes. And we've already talked about rickets and bone fractures, but it helps protect against osteoporosis. It helps with the absorption of calcium, and it regulates the immune function and neurotransmitter function as well. So, I mean, the significance of vitamin D is vast, especially when you're talking about people living as far north as we do, having office jobs, and frankly not seeing a great deal of sunshine. And there was a study in 2016 by Lindvist et al. That lasted for 20 years, and it followed nearly 30,000 people. And it found that individuals avoiding sun exposure were twice as likely to die from all causes. And interestingly, that you would think that people who were at the other end of the spectrum, who were getting a lot of sun exposure, would have more cases of skin cancer, but actually you see the opposite. So, it's absolutely critical, and I think it's a subject that we could dive into more on in future. And
yeah,
it's
definitely.
actually, yeah, I mean, it's miscategorized as a vitamin because it's actually a type of hormone. But yeah, hopefully that's a useful piece of takeaway advice for everybody to test their vitamin D status.
Well, yeah. So this was what I was going to ask: is what are your thoughts on? Is it really necessary to test, or is maybe people just take vitamin D supplements, sort of almost regardless?
I mean, I always say to people, look, it's better to test because then you can adjust your dose and get yourself exactly where you want to be with it. I do this subscription thing. Blood test in the summer, blood test in the winter, adjust accordingly, because there are so many variables that it's always a little bit dangerous to give out a general recommendation because it's affected by age and skin tone and many other factors. And older adults need more vitamin D because they're less able to make it in response to sunlight. So, I mean, typically what you might do is have somebody in the summer on 1,000 to 2,000 international units a day, and then in the winter, maybe sort of 2,000 to 4,000 international units a day would be safe ranges. But yeah, my advice would be, because it's so cheap and it's very easy to do, to do some testing. And probably the final bit of advice would be, if somebody is worried about their nutrient status, they can use an app like Chronometer and track their diet and see where they're at. And
so you were saying this can be done, like anyone can just download that?
Yeah, it's free.
Try it out.
Yeah,
very nice.
Absolutely. And there are lots of apps that do a sort of similar kind of thing. I think MyFitnessPal's also very good, but Chronometer is the one that I've chosen.
Oh, very nice. All right. So it feels like we're coming towards the end, but that was a good news story for Diana. And I think probably my takeaway from this discussion is that it's actually maybe easier than you think to individualize your own response to health. And so rather than taking just kind of blanket advice, eat more of this or take this pill, starting out by trying to uncover what's really going on in your specific body, and then tailoring it to that could be is maybe easier than you might think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary, Ed. Yes.
and vitamin D is important.
And vitamin D is important. Exactly right. So yeah, that's probably it from this episode of What About Porridge?
Excellent stuff. Well, until next time, it's goodbye from me.
Yeah, and it's goodbye from me. Thank you, Ed, and bye everyone.
Cheers. Thanks, Ben.